Calaroga Shark Media.
Hello, I'm Johnny Mac with your daily comedy news. This summer on Saturdays, I've been doing some interviews. Today's guest is Alex Bennett, radio personality, known for his mix of left-wing politics and humor. So why are you talking to this political guy, John? Well, back in the 80s, Alex was a jock in San Francisco where the press dubbed him the king of comedy for his influence on the local comedy scene. So you'll hear us talk about people like Bobcat Goldthwait and Patton Oswalt and Robin Williams. We'll also talk about some things like Dave Chappelle and current comedy. Alex and I worked together, like 2004 to 2013, something like that. And we would have very friendly political discussions in the hallway every day. We rarely agreed on anything, but it wasn't the current name-calling style of political disagreement. It was always like, I feel this way, you're crazy. You feel that way, you're crazy. So as part of this interview, towards the end, we lightly talk about politics. I did edit back that part of the conversation, one, because we had it before the debate, and the pieces on the board have changed since the debate, and two, I don't want to lose half the audience with you going, I can't believe you don't support candidate X. I hate your show now, John, that I listened to for 4 years, and you're stupid. And we'll share with you whatever you come away thinking my politics are at the end, you're probably wrong. You will hear us disagree on many things. There's a section about old jokes that kind of caught me off guard. Alex also had some hot takes about folks like Kevin Spacey that I didn't even know how to field. You'll hear that awkwardness. And along the way, Alex said some swear words. I thought about taking them out. It would have just made for choppy edits. So tighten your belt a notch today. I think there's two or three. One of them is the capital M, capital F one. So be prepared for that one. And if you normally listen to Daily Comedy News with your kids in the car, don't. Here's Alex Bennett. Let me just jump in here again to remind you we recorded this section before the debate. Back to the interview. So in my own career, I went through these weird phases. I did news talk for the first 10 years, and then when I started doing comedy at SiriusXM, everybody hit me with, well, what do you know about comedy? You're a news talk guy. Then 10 years later, when I got into podcasting and went back doing news talk, everybody said, but you're a comedy guy. So Alex, the Alex Bennett I know is a host on the left-leaning channel on SiriusXM, and we used to talk politics a lot during the days. And then I'm talking to Mike Chisholm from the Letterman podcast, who randomly drops your name and asks me if I know you. And I'm like, I know that guy. And he reminds me about your comedy chops and how you'd be a great guest. So this morning I'm prepping, even though I know you. But now after doing the prep, I'm like, maybe I don't really know Alex Bennett because, and I mean this lovingly, when I see the king of comedy, I'm like, oh, I missed the boat on a big chunk of this man's career. Let me dive in here. So I invite you on today, not to do our usual political friendly banter, but to talk comedy. So how did you become the king of comedy? That is not a light term.
That is not a light term. And I don't know that I ever particularly use the term myself. Okay. But when I was in San Francisco, I started a thing where everything I ever did in this business is, it's organic. I don't sit down and say, I'm going to do a show with comedians. Okay. A show with comedians kind of happened in that one thing led to another. And before I knew it, I was up to my ass in comics. And then, of course, the newspaper started referring to me as the king of comedy. You know, when I was here in New York years ago and I did left-wing politics and I did musicians and what we call left-wing politics, the Abbie Hoffmans and so on, the press referred to me as the youth guru. So you always get this kind of handle. And the one thing about radio that was great in those days is you could move to a completely different market and redefine yourself. And I always enjoyed comedy. And I met up with a comic who came on the show, and he was very funny. And I thought, this is very nice. And after the show, I said, do you have any other friends who might want to do the show? No comedians were doing radio shows at that time. And he said, yeah, I got this other friend, Bobby Slayton. And then Bobby Slayton, I said, I got this other friend, Jeremy Kramer. And Jeremy Kramer told me I got this friend and that friend. Before I knew it, I was up to my ass in comics. I was doing live comedy concerts and things like that. It became a literal business for me.
Now, what was your show back in the day? Were you spinning records? Were you mostly talking? Were you doing issues on the days you didn't have comedians?
In my career, except for the very early part of my career, I never spun records. I always resented the idea of using somebody else's talent to make my show work. Okay. So I was very much the undisc jockey. I mean, I came out of being a disc jockey. I'm not denying that. But I got tired of that. I thought that was very limited, in my opinion, and wasn't the kind of radio I wanted to do. So I didn't really ever play I played records occasionally, to fill time. I had to go to the bathroom now and then.
How early on were you going jockless? I think back to the New York market. Maybe other than WOR, there weren't really long form talk shows other than evening sports talk. But the modern talk era to me is more very late 80s, early 90s. But you were ahead of that.
I was doing talk in Houston, Texas. And God, I have to remember the years now. I go crazy trying to remember the years for that. The 1960s, maybe late 60s. Yeah. I was doing a talk show in Houston, Texas as Alexander Bennett, the man you love to hate. I didn't create that, by the way. That was given to me by the radio station.
That gets back to, in later days, everybody hates Howard Stern, so they listen to him 3 hours a day.
Yeah, exactly.
When you started having the comedians on, there's this weird thing with the comics. I guess when they're not really well known, they look up to the DJs, and then at some point they pass radio, and radio's not cool anymore. Even at Sirius, my listeners know I will name check. I won't do it today, but a particular comedian who's pretty famous now, who came up a lot in 2003, 2004, and then forgot our phone number. How did they react to you back in the day?
Pretty good, actually. And even to this day, some of them will still remember me and mention that I had a part in their career. Then there are others who I had very much a big part of their career and like to deny it, because I made it on my own. I didn't need Alex Bennett, blah, 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 blah. Well, yes, you did at that time. And you used me till the cows came home,
Yeah, it's not taking credit for someone's work. They're clearly talented, but you giving somebody exposure helps accelerate someone's career, and let's just be real about it.
Well, I don't want to see. Here's the thing. It's kind of like I don't want to have people deny that I had anything to do with their career. Yet, on the other hand, I don't want them to have to say, "Oh, hey, Alex Bennett helped me." Alex Bennett made my career. I don't want that either. I just want them not to resent me because I helped them at one time. I was telling the story today. This was interesting. If there are a few comics, I could probably say I had something to do with their career. Others who say I had something to do with their careers, that I go, well, it was more you than me. Okay. But one guy who I absolutely made in San Francisco, made him into a big star, was Bob Goldthwait. And Bob Goldthwait came to us from Boston, where he had done okay. He came to San Francisco, and he came on my show. And the one thing he noticed about me that nobody else was who did morning shows, he was expecting that I was going to, at some point, say during the interview, well, Bob, come on, what do you really like? And I never did that. What I did is I love being the straight man, and I played to the character. And he loved that. And because of it, because of the combination of me knowing how to use him and him appreciating what I was doing for him, he became I can't tell you what kind of a star he became in San Francisco. I would hold concerts with Bob Goldthwait on the bill, and they sold out in 15 minutes. Okay. And these were sometimes 1,000-seaters. So, I made this guy a star in San Francisco. And then people called him to come to LA and be in the movies, and he did the Police Academy films and some other films and whatever. He comes back to San Francisco to do a special on HBO for one of the one night stands, I think it was. And I figure I'll go backstage and say hello to Bob. I haven't seen him in a while. He's been in L.A. and whatever. I want to see how he is. And I go in to see him, and it's, oh, Alex, how are you? Arms around me. Gee, I'm so happy to see you're doing so well, Bob. Oh, thank you so much. And I really, appreciate our relationship. It was just huggy, kissy, wonderful, all of that, right? Now, I go out in the audience ready to see his act. And this is being taped, of course, for HBO. And the first 10 minutes of his act was putting me down.
No way.
Yes.
By name or as character?
By name.
Oh, tell me more about that.
No, I mean, I can't even remember what he said, but it was one thing after another. Alex Bennett, hey, what a this and that. And he, no talent, son of a bitch, blah, 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 And I'm going, wait a minute, wasn't the guy I was talking to 15 minutes ago, was it? And after that time, I just wrote him off. I never did anything to Bob except wish the best for him and try to set the table for his career, And he just So I think there's a sense of some comics will deny you. Okay, I'll tell you a guy who was a good guy, Patton Oswalt. He was doing a special in San Francisco for HBO, doing it at the Great American Music Hall, where we did a lot of our gigs. And he said to me, so I get a call, and it's Patton. He said, Alex, I just wanted to call and say hello. And I said, well, it's very nice of you to do that, Patton. He says, no, I wanted to tell you, tonight I'm playing the Great American Music Hall. I'm doing a special for HBO. And I have to thank you for my career. And I went, hey, and I said what I always say when a comedian would say something like that. I didn't do it. You did it. You were great. You were terrific, But it was a nice thing for him to do. He didn't have to do that. He went out of his way to call me.
That's super classy.
So some guys are really nice and appreciate what you did for them. And nobody should appreciate what I did for them. Hell, they did for me, too. I had a top morning radio show in San Francisco, and they were part of the reason why. And so I have to thank them, too. We used each other.
I find it a weird move to go after you or any jock, because in radio back in those days, even if you were an all-time ratings guru, maybe 12% of the town is listening to you and another 20% have heard of you. So if you go up and you start talking about the morning man, half the audience might not know who you're even talking about.
Well, in San Francisco, they probably knew pretty well. If they were going to a comedy show and they were interested in comedy, they probably listened to my show.
Good point.
So, that's why that played. But, so some comedians are really appreciative and others aren't. I don't care if they aren't appreciative, but no, don't go on television for 15 minutes or 10 minutes of your comedy act that they're taping and put me down. I don't deserve that.
And at this point, he's still doing the character?
No, he's not doing that anymore.
No, not anymore. But when he ripped into you.
Oh, yeah, he was still doing the characters. Yeah.
Yeah, he almost seems like a different person now. It does make me laugh that he titled one of his albums, You Don't Look the Same Either. I thought that was very funny. But he's done over his act. I do enjoy his modern comedy.
Well, the thing that I found about Bob is that sometimes you create a character that America loves. In his case, in San Francisco, that character was a very lovable character. He was a person who was totally afraid of everything and screamed and, was whatever. And it was a great act. But at a certain point, people like that suddenly one day wake up and go, oh, I want America to know what the real Bob Goldthwait is like. Well, they aren't buying the Bob Goldthwait that, eats dinner every night with his family. They're going there to see Bob Goldthwait, the comedian. And sometimes they start resenting the character they're playing. And it's sad when that happens because some of them create great characters, And one guy always persisted beautifully was Emo Phillips.
Sure.
And I got to tell you, Emo had a character. If anybody had a character, Emo had a character. Okay. And I would sometimes sit down either backstage or at a party or whatever with Emo and have a really strong political discussion, kind of like you and I used to have. And he was a right-winger, rabid right-winger. And so we would go back and forth and discussing it, and very intelligent guy. And I really liked Emo a lot, even though we didn't agree politically. But he had a character. He always lived with that character. He didn't care if anybody wanted to know who the real Emo Phillips was,
But backstage, did he drop it and speak in a more normal?
Oh, yeah, he dropped it completely. Yeah, dropped it completely. Now, another guy, people always ask me about Gilbert.
Yes, I was going to bring Gilbert up.
Yeah. Gilbert had a character, no question about it. Was Gilbert that way when he wasn't on stage? Well, he sounded like Gilbert, but he was quieter. He's much more demure. I mean, every year we would both go to the same Christmas party together, and we hate parties, so we both went off into a corner and would talk for hours, And yeah, there was a Gilbert voice, but it wasn't the Gilbert persona. You know what I'm saying? There's a difference between a persona and how you still sound like yourself when you're off the stage, but the demeanor is not the same.
Yeah, you'd be, hey, Gilbert, let's go back to Studio 3. Oh, okay. And that said, you wouldn't get the Aflac duck barking back at you.
Exactly.
More with Alex Bennett after this.
What made San Francisco such a great comedy scene? It still is. There are certain cities, New York, Boston, Philly, Austin in there now. I can go back and forth in LA. But San Francisco definitely had a scene, still has a scene, the Great Sketch Fest. What is it about the...
I'd like to say that at least that comedy scene during that period of time, which was the 1970s, was part of the way it was because of me. I mean, I had a radio show and we promoted comedy, and comedians came on it and established their characters on the, these guys were foolproof when they went to do a gig somewhere because people had already accepted their voice as it was, because what a comedian has to do when they first go on stage is establish who they are to the audience. And you got to do that as quickly as possible. You should be able to do it in the first 5 minutes so that if nobody has ever seen a Gilbert Gottfried, in the first couple of minutes, he's got to establish this character and bring you into his world. Well, if you did my radio show, you didn't have to do that because everybody had already been brought into your world. And they were there because they probably heard about it on my show that you were playing somewhere, and they went to see you. So you didn't have to do that salesmanship. I mean, I could go on stage and I could get big laughs on stage, but I'm not a comedian. I was an MC of these shows. And yet I got laughs just simply because it was all based upon they listened to me on the radio and I said something that had to do with the radio show or whatever, so it made comedians' jobs a lot easier.
Yeah. And you can kind of cruise on attitude and timing for 3, 4, 5 minutes in front of one audience once. I've been talking with several guests recently about things that sound like comedy, but maybe there's no actual joke there. You can kind of get into that rhythm.
Yeah, well, I'll give you an example of something. I said you have to establish yourself in the first couple of minutes you're on stage. Bring people into that world of yours, that kind of skewed world that you have, and then they laugh along with you at these things. The best comedian I've ever known for bringing people into him is a guy by the name of Larry Bubbles Brown. Now, I don't know if you know who Larry Bubbles Brown is.
I don't.
Larry Bubbles Brown, for my money, is one of the most professional comedians alive, okay? And Larry plays this deadpan on stage, okay? And the first words out of his mouth are, yesterday, somebody tried to steal my identity. Now they've got no life. That sets it all up for the next 10 minutes. It doesn't matter. He's established that character with that one joke.
I was reading an article, I think it was yesterday, with Jerry saying that he'll set up like, I'm having an argument with my wife, and he said the audience knows it's not true, but they're willing to go for the ride. They're willing to go for the bit.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Listen, Henny Youngman was saying, "Take my wife, please," long after she was dead. So I mean, but still, it's important that you establish yourself when you first go on stage. Bring people into that world of yours, that craziness that you inhabit.
But as a comedy snob, I sometimes struggle with, I'll be watching a set and I understand that, the basic, I compare it to graphing out a sentence when you're in grammar school. The basic, here's a premise, let me exaggerate it for effect, let me tell something that happened very colorfully, let me say something that probably didn't happen at all but is funny, and later do the callback. I get that, but sometimes I'll watch a set and I just don't believe a single word coming out of the artist's mouth. That I'm like, that never happened. This is just a made up story for laughs. And I struggle connecting with it, that they haven't sold it to me. Whereas Jerry's admitting to the tricks of the magician. And I go, yeah, all right. I can imagine maybe I'm profiling back to myself. I can imagine having a fight with my wife. Maybe that's what the connection is.
Could also be, comedy too well.
Well, that's true. I was just...
that can spoil it for you. I have, one of my best friends over the years has been Bobby Slayton, who I think is inexorably one of the greatest stand-ups alive. Okay, and he doesn't even do his act anymore because he feels he's been, shut out of the business by people being too socially. What's the word I'm looking for? Socially right, correct. Okay. Because his act isn't that way. Puts down everybody, Chinese, black people. There's a black guy in the audience. He's kind of like Rickles in that fashion. And Bobby is just an incredible comic, and he finds he can't work anymore because his act has problems. That people are just too. Oh, that's not correct. You shouldn't say that about women. Can't do the wife jokes anymore, even though his wife's dead, by the way. But he can't do the wife jokes. So he's got to, the girlfriend jokes. He can't do them anymore. He said most of my act's been gutted.
But who are the people that are offended? I talked about this on the show the other day. Every day there's an article, some comedian. I just saw Julie Louis-Dreyfus reacting to it. You can't say anything anymore. But who are these people? Who's actually canceled? Like, who's telling Bobby he can't do that act?
When he goes to a college and they start booing him for a joke, there are a lot of comedians now who just will not play colleges any longer.
Yeah, I know Jerry's one of them. Can you imagine like that?
They're too politically correct. Yeah.
A college student being more uptight than a 67-year-old comedian? Like, what has happened?
That's absolutely correct. And the fact is that I hate it when I see that Bobby decided to quit the business. He just, it's that and salaries they're paying too. They're trying to get away as cheaply as possible. Hey, Slayton, you want $4,000 a week? I can go get Bobby asshole to work for a third of that. So why should I hire you? Because you're a draw. You're not a draw in this theater. Blah 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 blah. It's very hard for especially older comedians today to work. I mentioned Larry Bubbles Brown, who you may not know, but he's worked more consistently with people than I've ever known because he's the perfect opening act. And so he always opens for Dana Carvey, and there's this a Spanish guy that he opens up for. I can't remember his name now. Esparza?
Felipe Esparza.
Felipe Esparza. Anytime he's in the Bay Area, he has Bubbles open for him. He had Bubbles open for him at the Netflix festival, because he's a great opening act, because he does, one of his main things is he doesn't spoil the room. There are comedians who spoil the room. You put a Bob Goldthwait on, nobody wants to follow him. Why? Not because he's great, because he's loud. And loud comedians are hard to follow. So you want an opening act that doesn't spoil the room, and he doesn't spoil the room.
I was looking at your resume, and I had no idea. I found this poster. HBO comedy, half hours, hosted by Alex Bennett, 1995 Fillmore poster, $50, by the way. But listen to this lineup. I mean, you were there. Bob, Jonathan Katz, Mark Maron, Judy Gold, Dana Gould, Janine Garofalo, Carlos Mencia. I mean, that's some lineup. If I had to rank them, Jonathan Katz is the 7th greatest comedian on that list. That's some show.
Yeah, that was an HBO one night stand, or what were they? Half-hour comedy?
Yeah, half-hour comedy hour.
Yeah, this was an HBO show that they were taping in San Francisco. And all I did at that point, if you listen to the old one night stands, the first season, I'm the announcer on the first season. But all I did really was I hustled the crowd into the show, and then I opened up the show by being the warm up guy. But those were not my shows.
The poster's pretty awesome, though.
Oh, it is. I know.
It's good. You also, it says here, you were the host of Public Television's Comedy Tonight on KQED. You're somebody I talk to every day for 10 years. I had no idea.
5 seasons. And then I was replaced as the host by Whoopi Goldberg.
I can argue that either way, right?
I want them to come on with a thing that says, tonight the part of Alex Bennett will be played by Whoopi Goldberg. Yeah.
At least it's somebody we've heard of.
Yeah, no, I was the host of that show for, I think it was 5 years.
What was that show like? What happened on it?
It was a half-hour show, 3 comics per show. Came out of what was, I think it's now called Wolfgangs, or maybe it was called Wolfgangs. Can't remember now. But anyway, we did the shows out of there, and we would go in once a year, spend a couple of nights, and do all these shows, and then I got residuals for another 20 years.
Oh, that's nice. 50 cents or $5,000? Can I ask?
No, I got paid $150 a show. And then, when they put the shows back on and ran the various places and so on and so forth, the ones I really made off, who made me the most money I've ever made? Bill Maher. Because they still run his HBO one night stand on Max. And every time they keep doing that, every year I get another check. Each year it's for less and less money. But I figure over the years I've made maybe $3,000-$4,000 from Bill Maher.
Thanks, Bill.
Thanks, Bill. Just for doing the opening. But by the way, that's a great story. He's doing the one night stand, okay? It's HBO's one night stand. So I do the warm up, right? And every night I get a little better. I get a little funnier. I build a little act. But by the 5th night of doing these shows, I'm pretty damn good. Okay. But I'm not a stand-up, and I never will be, and I don't ever expect to compete in that arena. But anyway, so we're doing the show that night with, among other things, Bill Maher doing his show. So I do the warm up, and part of it is I'll say, like, how many here, like, I don't know who the president was at the time, and some of them will boo and cheer and so on. But what you're trying to do is, among other things, you're trying to get a reaction from the audience that they can have some sound to use if they have to fill in the show, like laughing or applauding or whatever. I get the people to applaud and all that. So anyway, before I go on, I'm called into Bill Maher's dressing room, and he looks at me and he says, you're Alex Bennett, is it? I said, yes, I'm Alex. You're the warm-up guy on the show? I said, well, I'm not really the warm-up guy. I'm kind of, just going out and getting people warmed up. So he says, do you do any political? And I said, well, I use a few political things to get people to applaud and to cheer and get a reaction. How many people here like so-and-so? And I can't remember who was president at the time and who the opposition was, but, and he says, so you do comedy, you do political? I said, well, no, that's not really political. I'm just, He said, well, I do political, so stop doing it. And I looked at him and I said, I happen to know you're making $20,000 for this show tonight. Follow me, motherfucker.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
Political comedy has kind of become a lightning rod now. If I'm thinking back, depending on the president, some presidents made for better comedy. Everybody had a generic Nixon. Everybody did the Ronald Reagan whale. Maybe not so much Bush other than somebody doing Dana Carvey's. Nobody really nailed Obama. But I feel like these days, other than the late night guys piling on Trump, I feel like there's a fear to really go political at all. You just immediately lose half the audience, whereas back in the day, you could make a Bill Clinton joke.
Yeah, you could, and people would laugh at it because you're making fun of the character of Bill Clinton, not the personal problems that Bill Clinton might have. I think that people are too sensitive. Yeah, you're going to lose half the audience if you tell them where you are politically these days. I think that goes for any place. The trouble I have, and I enjoy all the bashing of Trump. I have no compunctions about that. But I wonder if it isn't cheap, because he's really easy to get a laugh from,
Yes.
It's almost like, why don't you use the F word? Why shouldn't you use the F word in I always hated comedians who would use, well, we can say it here, who used fuck as a punchline, They'd be telling someone, and fuck, and and everybody would laugh. And I go, that's not comedy. You don't use that as a punchline. And the same thing is true with Trump. Very easy. It's very easy to do that, And I don't know if I had a comedy act somewhere, if I would go after Trump, because I consider it maybe cheap.
But conversely, I personally like a good old-fashioned Joe Biden is so old joke. And the joke's not really about Biden, despite his age. It's really a so-and-so is so old punchline here. I love those.
Well, I am 84 years old, and I get a bit upset by them because, again, they're kind of a cheap shot. It's always about, blah, 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 Alex Bennett, Metamucil. At 84, I don't know if I find ageism funny. We got enough problems being old without having to have people laugh at us.
So
see, I don't.
I want to keep the courage of my own convictions here, and you and I have a 20-year relationship of respectful discussions. And so,
well, you were always wrong.
I was always wrong. I admitted that to you in the pre-tape. I like a good, solid. Joe Biden was at the D-Day ceremony. It was the first time he had been there since serving as a colonel in 1945. Like, it's a silly joke. And at the risk of offending you, hey, Alex Bennett was talking about D-Day. It must have been really great for him to see his old friends. Like, it's just, to me, that's just a joke.
Well, to you, it's a joke. To somebody that age, it's not as much of a joke. It's kind of like saying, oh, that joke about a black person was just a joke. But if you're black, it may not be a joke.
So then what can we joke about? Well,
you can joke about anything. And I have the right to be offended by it if I want to, but I don't have the right to stop you from offending me. Does that make sense?
It makes total sense.
Yeah, I have the right to be offended. As I got older, I got to tell you I'll tell you a story. I was doing comedy tonight in San Francisco, and what I would have to do is I would have to go into Channel 9 in San Francisco, which was the PBS station, and record some voiceovers for stuff we had missed or for the shows that we were doing or whatever. But I had to do the voiceovers. So I'm sitting over there waiting in the lobby to get going on this thing. And the woman who is the receptionist there says, by the way, Mr. So-and-so over at Over Easy would like to see you. Now, Over Easy was a show they did with Hugh Downs. It was about age and about aging. Okay. And so I said, okay, I've got a couple of minutes. I'll go over there. And I went over there and I introduced myself. He said, hi, I says, I've listened to your show in the morning a lot. He said, and you make jokes about old people. He said, now I'm not here to tell you to stop. He said, but the fact is it's hard enough being old, because this guy was the expert on aging and ageism. He said, it's difficult enough getting old without having somebody make fun of you. And he said, you really should stop doing that. And I thought about it, and I said, he's right. And I never did another he's so old joke ever again, because he felt that it's hard enough being old, but it gets really hard when people are making a joke about it,
Now, I appreciate that. I think one of the things, especially as we age, is you learn that life's a journey, and all you can try and do is be a better person than you were the day before. And along the way, some mistakes were made. I've been open with this audience back.
Well, I try to be the worst person I can be every day. I figure I didn't do it well enough when I was younger. I want to get down when I'm older. Great thing about being old is that you can just yell at people, get out of my way, get off of my lawn, and they fully expect it. So what are you doing?
I remember back at Sirius, it was pretty early in my run. We had something on the air, and one day one of my friends from OutQ, which was the LGBTQ plus station, came by in a very friendly way and said, "What the hell's your problem?" And I was like, "What are you talking about?" And he pointed out the thing that we had on the air that was offensive, that here 20 years later, I'm embarrassed by. I wish we hadn't done it at the time. Mm-hmm. I put it on the air. I approved it. It didn't accidentally make it on the air. I was just too stupid, ignorant, foolish, uneducated, didn't realize we were hurting people, and we took it off the air as soon as it was brought to our attention.
What was it?
Jim Brewer had a bumper. He used to use a word that rhymes with rag and starts with F. I don't want to use it. And he would explain it as it had nothing to do with sexuality. He would describe it as the kid who couldn't kick the kickball in the playground. Was how Jim explained it. And us denim jacket wearing knuckleheads from Queens and Long Island who grew up in the 80s didn't think twice about it. And then the coworker came over and was like, "What is your problem?" And I was horrified. I'm still horrified by this 25 years later, but I don't have a time machine. I'll own up to it. I'm sorry we did it, but I can't go back in time.
Yeah, but also you did it at a time when it was still fairly acceptable and wasn't in your purview as being wrong. Today, you might not do it. Today, you might feel guilty about it because you now know how wrong it was in retrospect. But at the time, you didn't. I'll tell you, when I had comedians on every morning. And all of a sudden, in the middle of doing my little morning comedy show, something hit San Francisco that hit San Francisco before it hit anywhere else. It was a thing called AIDS, and it was hitting pretty badly, and people were dying by a high number. But I, being the straight guy, not hanging out in the Castro district or anything like that, never really thought about it, And I had comedians coming on making jokes about AIDS, okay? Which at that point you went, oh, well, it's just a joke about AIDS, blah, 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 blah. One night I'm watching television, they show a guy with AIDS, and he's got all these Kaposi sarcoma all over his face and his body and so on. And he's gaunt and looks like he's on the edge of death. And I said to myself, there's no joke in this disease. So the next day I went in, and every comedian who came on, I said, no AIDS jokes. And I was the first guy actually in San Francisco to realize that. But I just found that I didn't see anything funny in AIDS. I didn't see there's only one funny AIDS joke I've ever heard. Okay. And that was, what's the worst part about having AIDS? Having to tell your parents you're Haitian.
That's a good joke. I just struggle. I wanted to laugh at the joke. That's a good joke. And I'm like, can I laugh at this? Am I going to be canceled? This is the struggle.
You see, every other gay joke these comedians were doing was at the expense of the person being gay. Okay. That joke isn't at the expense of somebody being gay. And so, but otherwise I just said no more jokes about AIDS, and I hit it right on the head. Then a lot of other people realized that was the way to go too, but I mean, it was horrible. It was a horrible disease. What's funny about it?
How did comedians react to you putting up a boundary?
None of them were bothered by it. They understood what I was saying.
That's great.
I explained it to them. I said, I've seen people with AIDS, and it's not funny. There's nothing. You wouldn't tell me a funny joke about cancer. You can't really come up with a funny cancer joke, can you? And they said no. And I said, then how can you come up with a funny AIDS joke?
For those of us of a certain age, my age, Eddie Murphy's Raw/Delirious was a cornerstone comedy piece because we were too young to realize what a Richard Pryor cover act it was. But he has the first 10, 15 minutes of that set. There are some age jokes in there. I mean, nothing in that set has aged particularly well. but I could probably do the entire thing off the top of my head. That's how many times I listened to it and laughed at it as a 14-year-old.
I never found Pryor a very good stand-up.
Interesting. Talk to me.
Not Pryor.
Eddie.
I mean, Eddie Murphy.
I thought you were going to go on a hard take here, Alex Bennett.
Well, for exactly the reason you said. It wasn't funny because he was trying to be Richard Pryor, only in a leather suit.
Well, even Sunset Strip, Richard's wearing a red suit.
Yeah.
It's a total lift. I was 14. I didn't know. But as I've studied this, I go back and I listen to the way Richard tells a story, the voices Richard does, and Eddie's a cover act. Doesn't mean it's not funny, but it's a cover band.
Pryor was empirical. He was one of the best of all time. I didn't come to appreciate Carlin till years later. In fact, I interviewed him, and that's what kind of made me listen to more Carlin in a different fashion. And I got to really like Carlin's work. I thought that as a stand-up comedy, he was comedian. He had a rhythm in his style, and it was very precise. That anytime he went on stage, all of that material was literally set in stone, word for word, before he went on stage. There was no ad-libbing or whatever. But it was brilliant in the way it was presented and his timing on it. Much like years earlier, I was privileged to see and was a fan of Lenny Bruce. And Lenny was a very musical act. I mean, he was to comedy what Miles Davis was to jazz. There was a rhythm there in his presentation that was very musical, very musical.
I feel like Lenny has gotten left behind. I forgot who said this recently. One of the topics that'll come up is when we talk about best comedian of all time, like, where do you want to start? You want to start at Shakespeare or at what point? And somebody compared Carlin and Pryor to almost being John the Baptists of comedy, of ushering in that modern era of maybe instead of doing 10, 15 minutes, we're going to do an hour here and putting out albums. Mm-hmm. And that's when comedy started to change. And I feel like Lenny got a little bit left behind. Now, part of that, as somebody who has programmed comedy on the radio for 20 years, is factually the recordings just aren't as good. I remember at Sirius early in the run, my boss, Jeremy Coleman, asked me why I didn't play much Richard Pryor. And the answer was because the records sounded like garbage. And when we pumped them through the satellite and back and through the speakers, they didn't sound good on the radio. So I didn't play them. Now, since then, they've been well remastered. But I feel like Lenny, Mrs. Maisel kind of helped a little bit, but I feel like Lenny got left behind.
Lenny got left behind, and he shouldn't be. His voice is still resonant. The stuff he was talking about still, much of it can play today and not have, I don't know if I don't think it's aged badly. I just think people have forgotten him. I think if they played him today, people would get a good laugh out of it.
The question then is, who's the they? That's the issue.
No, they is the buying public. And what are they buying today? I've just seen some of the comedians that are out there, and I quite frankly, and maybe I sound like an old man, feel a lot of them don't deserve the adulation they're getting. I liked what's his name, Mulaney, for a while. And then I watched him do this thing on Netflix a couple of weeks ago, and he was terrible. He was just horrible.
See, I think that show was misproduced. I've talked about this on the podcast a lot. Mm-hmm. You've hosted talk radio. Civilians can't tell a story. Get their point, get them out of there. And I'm watching this thing screaming at my television. They're taking calls from civilians. You have Jerry Seinfeld sitting next to you. All you have to do is shut up and ask Jerry a question and hang back. Why are you letting some?
Well, that's the one thing. That's one thing a lot of people never learn, and that was the reason I was good at doing what I did on radio. I was not perhaps a very good comedian, but I was one of the world's best straight men, and I knew how to play straight man to people. And that was I mention with Goldthwait, the reason Goldthwait liked me was because most interviewers who would interview Goldthwait would have stopped and said, "Come on, Bob, tell us what you're really like." And I didn't do that. I played to the character, and I played straight man to the character. And I always loved playing straight man over anything else, or the butt of jokes.
Yeah, well, sure. And if you get a good guest, this gets back to Johnny Carson theory. People would say, "Did you see Carson last night? He was great." And what they meant was Dom DeLuise told a great story.
Well, here was the great talent that Johnny had. He knew when to shut up.
Yeah.
Really. Steve Allen once said, and it resonated with me, and I was never a big fan of Steve Allen's, but he was right. He said, you're running a talk show. There are a couple of things you should remember. Number one, you're having the guest on to work for you. Okay, so don't try to top him. And that's probably the best piece of advice anybody could take. If you're interviewing a comedian, don't try to top him. Try to get the next joke out of him.
I took that approach to programming, specifically the Raw Dog channel. I have heard over the years other comedy products, and everyone tries to make the bumpers things like comedy radio. And you're coming out of George Carlin's perfectly honed routine, the one they chose to press to vinyl. Don't follow that with a joke. We just said the station ID and moved on to the next thing. That's absolutely good advice. You're not going to be funnier than the comedians. No way.
Well, and the other thing he said was, the other rule is, don't try to be funny. Try to be fun. He said, funny, you can't do constantly. You can't get a laugh every time. Fun, you can always be enjoyable. That makes sense?
Absolutely. I've never been a fan of comedian guests that go for their act. Alex, how you doing? I'll tell you how I'm doing. I just got back from the airport, and this TSA, it just...
Oh, I hated comics that just did their act.
Yeah.
So how are you these days? Well, funny thing happened to me yesterday, blah, blah, blah. And I'm going, I like the comics who just could sit there and ad lib with me toe to toe. And that was wonderful. And some of them were terrific at it, But when they came on and did nothing but material, that was the last time they were going to be on my show.
More coming up with Alex Bennett. As I mentioned in the open, in this next section here, we lightly talk about politics. The reason I'm sharing it is because Alex and I are friends, and for 10 years in the hallway every day, we discussed politics. So I thought it would be weird of me to have Alex on and not talk politics at all. Don't worry, we're not getting too much into it.
We mentioned George Carlin. When I was programming the Raw Dog channels, he had his final 2 albums. And at the time, I did not like them. I thought it was bitter. Carlin had lost his way. And 20 years later, I think he's the great prophet of the 21st century. I mean, his later political material, I can play some of those bits today. It sounds like he recorded them this morning.
I mean, he did get bitter, more and more bitter as time went on, But he was, I think, I wasn't a big fan of his for years because I didn't like him because all of a sudden he was wearing his hair long, and wearing a beard like he wanted to play to the hippies of the day. Where before he had worn a suit and been, George Carlin, Mr. Straight. And it took me a while to realize the real George Carlin was what I was seeing, not the one who was wearing the suit. So if he was whoring himself out, it was back then when he was wearing the suit, not when he was trying to appeal to me. But I resented that. And so for years, I didn't like or listen to Carlin. And then when I finally did, I went, this guy he's the best. His presentation, his timing, everything, impeccable.
And something to say. He had something to say. It wasn't just...
always something to say. Yes, absolutely.
For the modern scene, is there anybody that floats your boat?
Who was it? There's a female comic who was on the Brady roast. I'm trying to remember her name now.
Nikki Glaser.
Nikki Glaser. I think she's very funny.
She crushed. She crushed that day.
Yeah, that was the only thing on that whole thing that was worth watching, by the way. That Brady roast was the worst thing I've ever seen.
Oh, I think it's the best thing of the year. Talk to me.
No, I don't. I'll tell you why. I mean, they had people who are not comedians trying to roast him. And what you got to do, too bad Gilbert isn't alive. He's a guy who knows how to do a roast, And Nikki Glaser came close to that, She was very good. I became a big fan of her. And then I watched her specials, my wife and I, and she's very critical, and she just loves Nikki Glaser,
I enjoy the art of the roast when the comedians kind of switch up so if it's the roast of Tom Brady, instead of making Tom Brady jokes, sort of goes sideways and say, oh, and Alex Bennett is here, and then just take some kind of...
That's what you did at roast. That's what you did at roast, though. See, the thing is, the roast died the day they put them on TV. But now that it's on Netflix, they should be as filthy as is humanly possible, because you got to remember the Friars Club. These guys, I had a friend who belonged to the Friars Club, so I went to the Friars Club with them a lot. And I went to one thing one night where they were just doing something with somebody. It wasn't a roast or anything. And it was all these old comics, the Shecky so-and-sos and the, Bobby so-and-sos. And they were all getting up one after another. And I don't think I ever laughed that much in my life. All of a sudden, these mediocre comics that I'd seen on TV and gone, old Borscht Belt, they were just killing it when they didn't have any cameras there, when they didn't have any microphones there, and nobody was going to, in years later, put them in judgment of what they had said at that roast.
My guide to interviewing Alex Bennett says I'm supposed to say Robin Williams at some point. I've been remiss. We're nearly an hour in. Did you have encounters with Robin? Do you have any good Robin stories?
Robin did my show in San Francisco, total of one time. It was a very memorable time. It was wonderful to have Robin on. The reason Robin didn't do my show a lot is because I had to call him on stealing jokes. I felt that, a comic coming up works hard at getting material, and to suddenly have it stolen from him and used on The Tonight Show ruins that joke in just about a minute and a half. So that this guy, whenever he goes on stage and does that joke again, people will yell out, oh, Robin Williams did that joke. Because if Robin Williams did the joke, it was his joke. Okay. And he would keep stealing material. I remember sitting at Cobb's Comedy Club, the old Cobb's Comedy Club, back in the back room, the night that Robin was on The Tonight Show. And all these comedians were sitting there one after the other, says, that's my joke. That's my joke. It's my joke. It's my joke. And the fact was that when I met up with Robin once, I said, you just shouldn't steal from people. That's what I have against you, Robin. It's not right. These people are coming up. They fight for every piece of material they have, and then you use it one night on The Tonight Show, and it can never be done again. I don't care if you want to write them out a check for it. The only person that has a right to say, yes, you can use my material is the guy whose material it is, and not for you to steal it first and send the check later.
So how does a guy like that make it? Is he more charismatic? Is he handsome? He has a better agent. Hollywood doesn't care if you steal jokes, all of that.
In his later years, Robin got to be very good about this, and he did improve, and I have to give him credit for that. Okay. And there are a lot of comics who love him because he did good stuff for them. Okay. So I'm going to give Robin that and give him a pass on the rest of it. But how he made it, how can I describe it? His act was doing the best impression of a comedian he possibly could.
I got it.
Do you get what I'm saying?
I totally get what you're saying. Before, it sounds like comedy, but he's telling other people's jokes. That Robin Williams is so funny. And I'd say, okay, tell me something funny, he said. Silence. It was just that he went on. He did this comedy, which is basically word salad. You didn't really understand it, but you weren't willing to admit you didn't understand it. And then when he was finished, you went, oh, that guy's great. Are you following Dave Chappelle? I'm bothered by Dave Chappelle's greatness, and yet he has chosen to make his someday obituary. The second line is going to be about digging in on transgender jokes. The way I've been explaining this lately is, Alex, you know why it's so hot in New York City today? Because of the trans, and you slap your knee and you mug for the camera with a smile and you get a laugh. And it boggles my mind. Why is Dave Chappelle choosing to make that the thing that's going to be the second line of his obit?
I think, and this is I can't read Dave Chappelle's mind, but let me try and do it for a second here. I think he doesn't want to give up. He doesn't want to say, I won't do that because you're pressuring me. He wants to say, I won't do that because it's his decision. And I think that's why he digs his heels in. I saw a very interesting interview with Piers Morgan, who, again, is a person I don't particularly find wonderful, but he did a terrific interview with Kevin Spacey. And Spacey was saying, I haven't been found guilty of anything anywhere. All the charges have been thrown out, Anybody who sued me civilly has lost. He said, I should be working right now. And then he asked him, well, how do you feel about Netflix? And he said, Netflix, as soon as this thing hit, before I was even found guilty of anything or even put on trial or even charged, they got rid of me. He said, you would think they would have been that way with Dave Chappelle, but they weren't. He said they didn't go after Dave Chappelle in the same way they went after me, and I did nothing. Interesting. Why do you think Netflix has stood by Dave Chappelle and dug their heels in?
I find it disingenuous that Netflix always has House of Cards on the main menu, but never a picture of Kevin Spacey. Kevin Spacey's in this show? I had no idea. Really? Is he in House of Cards? They show everybody but.
The man's been erased, literally erased from anything. They even took him out of a movie and replaced him with Christopher Plummer at a cost of several $100,000 to film the scenes and to pay the actor. What's happened to Spacey is sad. It's time for the people in the industry to turn around and say it's time to hire Kevin Spacey again.
That seems like one of those things that, he'll have, it won't be yet. He'll have to come back and play against type, whatever type would be, and just do a really deep character role.
Yeah, but he has to get hired first, and nobody will hire him. There are some people starting to come to his defense now. So maybe one of those people will say, he's a good actor. I want him in my movie. Screw all of you, and that will break it. But he mentions Kirk Douglas with the Blacklist and the fact that Dalton Trumbo wrote Spartacus, and he was going to they were going to put on a fake name for Dalton Trumbo on the screenplay, and Kirk Douglas said no, the Blacklist stops here, and I'm putting his name on this movie. When that happened, everybody else dropped the Blacklist as well, and that was the end of it. What he needs is his Kirk Douglas.
It's interesting you bring up. He is one of the few actually canceled. Louis C.K. is top of mind because of the new documentary.
Horrible what happened to Louis.
On the flip side, Jerry Seinfeld's dating history is quite colorful, and everybody's like, yeah, okay, whatever.
Yeah, but here's the thing with Louis that just really bothered me. These women go to see him. He says, do you mind if I pull out my penis? Did any of them say no? No, none of them said no. And so Louis did. And then they're offended by it. But he asked permission first. That's a real gentleman.
But what about the implied power dynamic? How do I say no to this person?
Well, I mean, you could walk out of the room. He asked you in a very pleasant way. He didn't ask you in a threatening way. If you want to look at his penis in order to curry favor with him, then who's being the whore?
I don't have a retort. I'm gonna leave that alone. These days, you're hosting on Gabnet. It's great to see you're still doing there, and I see the posts on Facebook. Looks like a very lively group. If you could explain to everybody what Gabnet is and how we can participate.
Oh, Gabnet is just, a bunch of people calling up, talking about stuff. I have a Monday show, which I do, which I really like, because it's just really friendly people who like each other, as opposed to a bunch of people who start arguing with each other, which is on Wednesdays, Thursdays, and Friday nights at 10:30 Eastern. The other show is 4 o'clock on Mondays on Facebook. So it's, it makes this 84-year-old still have to forced to use his chops.
No, I think that's good. For several reasons. I always say it's good to have something on your calendar, and we all need to get these things out of our system one way or another. It's one of the reasons I started this podcast is, me yelling at the wall about Chappelle does nothing. At least here I can have, a couple thousand people either agree or disagree.
Also, if I could, I'd like to push something I haven't pushed in a long time. And that is that on the gabnet.net, which is our webpage, there's a thing called Alex Bennett's Life in the Passing Lane. It's the history of my life in 69 episodes.
Oh, wow.
And a lot of it has stuff about the comedians. A lot of it has stuff to do with, 1970, 1960s radical era, and people that I would have had a relationship with, like John Lennon and so on. And it's every inch of my life, and I think people might find that interesting.
Thank you for saying John Lennon. I had that on my notes, and I forgot to ask you about it. You met John Lennon. What's John Lennon like?
I often said that if you met John Lennon, you'd be expecting, oh boy, I'm going to meet this brilliant, brilliant guy. And he almost seemed stupid.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. He never had what he was a savant. What he did musically was brilliant. Just the best lyricist. He and Cole Porter, two of the best lyricists of the last century. Okay. Incredible. Yeah, Yoko was the brains of the family. Okay. I like Yoko a lot. And I like John. John was okay, but I especially liked Yoko.
You've got a couple interesting takes here. I've never heard that take on Yoko. What is it about her?
I think she was brilliant. I think she was a brilliant artist. And I think her association with John Lennon kind of stifled that because she was living in his shadow. And she shouldn't have. She was too good at what she did. She was a brilliant artist before he met her. And I loved Yoko. I think the world of Yoko.
Did you ever see the photo album that our mutual coworker, Pat St. John, the New York City disc jockey, has? Did he ever show you his photo album?
No.
So aside from the amazing photos, the way Pat would present it to you, he'd put it on the table and he'd very slowly flip the pages and he'd be like, and this is me with, and your brain is going, it's obviously John Lennon. And this is me with, it's obviously David Bowie. And everybody in this photo album is like elite Mick Jagger level rock star. You would identify every single person. They're in the picture with Pat, but he takes the minute to explain to you like, and this is me with, yes, those are the Eagles.
Well, there are moments in my life that I have tapes that are kind of like that. I mean, I was the first guy in the United States to interview Elton John, for instance. I had on all of the Grateful Dead at the same time, except for Pigpen. And I got high with them, but not because I wanted to. I had a lawyer that said to me, if somebody starts smoking a joint in our studio, you can let them, but you can't join in. Okay. So they came in, they all lit up at the same time. And the room was filled with marijuana smoke, but I couldn't have any. And by the end of the hour, I didn't even know what my name was anymore.
That is a great story. I should get out on top. But I want to ask you, I got to spend a couple of minutes talking politics.
With politics? Oh, okay.
I want to lose half the audience here. So I'll just say nothing. I'll let you answer. Where do you think we're heading?
Why don't I be the right winger and then you can be the left winger and then we can keep the whole audience?
How do you handicap this thing? Is Uncle Joe going to pull this off or are we looking at Trump too?
Well, there's no way that Joe should lose this. I mean, if you're a sensible human being, I mean, look, it's not even a choice for me either. If I didn't have to vote for Joe Biden, I wouldn't vote for Joe Biden. And quite frankly, I don't have to vote for Joe Biden. I live in New York, and our votes are all chopped down into 79 electoral votes? So he's going to win this state whether I go out to vote or not. All right. But in a state like, say, South Carolina, then there's a place you got to get out and vote. And why do you have to vote for Joe Biden? And listen, it's a terrible choice we're being handed here, and it's rumored that most of America doesn't even like the choice.
I think back to our hallway political discussions and how far we've come. I mean, some of the stuff we would talk about was, boy, look at that John Kerry. Look at him on a surfboard. He's so out of touch. These were the discussions we were having. Now you would kill for such a candidate.
No, I still wouldn't kill for him, but I don't know. I just feel there are better people out there who are suited to run for office.
Well, think about in the past, we have candidates got not canceled, but eliminated because, so-and-so might have smoked marijuana or somebody went, on a stage it got canceled. We've come a long way.
Yep, we sure have. We've lowered our expectations.
How do we get better people to run?
I think we have to offer them the ability to run and not be assailed in the way they get assailed today. You know, to be able to run on the basics, like what you're going to do for the country. I mean, the thing that bothers me most about Trump is, when do you ever hear him talk about what he's going to do for the country? Basically, most of his speeches are railing against all the harm that's been thrown his way, and that how he was cheated with the trial in New York and blah, 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 blah. And there's no like, well, here's how I'm going to make America better.
But there's in modern times, there's the showbiz aspect of it. I think back to Al Gore. One of his big things was the climate emergency. He's running for basically Bill Clinton's third term, and he got outperformed by a fake cowboy.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Trump figured out the game. He's better at the game than everybody else.
Well, I don't know if he's better at the game. I mean, he had everybody convinced that he was really good with money, you know? And now we've learned he doesn't know a thing about money, you know? And everybody went, oh, I saw him on The Apprentice. He really knows money. Well, this isn't The Apprentice. This is America. This is democracy that's at stake.
But the debates are a reality TV show. All I have to do is get up there and zing you a couple times, and I win the night.
Yeah, yeah. But I don't know that he can do that with Biden necessarily. You know, the optics don't look good. If you're going to portray Biden as this old, doddering old man, then what are you doing if you go after him? You're beating up on an old man, you know.
And we know you don't like that. We've brought this full circle.
No, I don't like that at all. I don't like getting beaten up on.
All right, we've now lost half the audience. So who's your favorite comedian of all time?
My favorite comedian of all time, couldn't even begin to say, because there are so many good ones and for different reasons. I mean, Seinfeld is beautiful at what he does. He's a beautiful, if I had an example of, here's a comedian you should watch to see how to be a comedian, it would be Seinfeld. Okay. On the other hand, you know, Lenny, I saw Lenny. Lenny was a favorite of mine when I was growing up, you know? So, I mean, who was the greatest of all time? They're all great for different reasons. But I could make you a list, I suppose, of the top 10. That would be much fairer, but that would take too long here. So,
is there one show you remember seeing that sticks out?
I think the comedian that I think is maybe the best stand-up club comedian in the country is Bobby Slayton. You're probably not all that familiar with Bobby. I'm sure you are on a certain level,
yes.
But, you know, I don't think I've seen a better stand-up than Bobby, period. You know, plants his feet on the stage and he makes you laugh. That's the job.
And that's Alex Bennett. I hope you enjoyed him. Little feistier than usual. And that's your comedy news for today. Back tomorrow with a normal episode. See you then.